This video is sponsored by War Thunder. Lately, the US Navy hasn't had a good time. Why? Because the FAXX has been delayed.
FAXX.
On the FAXX.
The FAXX like 8 weeks ago
Has been delayed.
It may be defunded altogether.
Yep, the Navy Super Duper 6th generation fighter has been delayed. It is almost official, and even if the decision should be partially reversed, it has already accumulated delays. And even if it was totally reversed, we just discovered that there are not enough resources to build it on time. And the Air Force F-47 and CCA programs all have an impact on the FAXX. Oh, and Trump clearly favors the Air Force. Okay, it is the usual mess. Let's try to work it out together. Hi, welcome. I am Gus, and this is Millennium 7. But before diving deep into the FAXX conundrum, a word from our sponsor. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and it is available now for free on PC, consoles and mobile devices. There are more than 2,500 vehicles available in the game, airplanes and plenty of them, but also tanks and ships. They range from the roaring 20s to our modern age for the 10 major nations. The gameplay is immersive, the graphic is realistic, the sound effects compelling, and the vehicles as detailed as technically possible. If you have a low-end PC like I do, don't worry. The Dagger engine is optimized to produce excellent frame rate and lag-free performance even on older machines. I particularly like the way every vehicle is modeled in detail, so the damage model produces effects like they would happen on their real counterparts. Moreover, every time there is a hit, you are presented with an X-ray vision of the damage done, which is cool. Join a worldwide community of over 70 million players and immerse yourself in a breathtaking experience. If you are a military history fan, this is the game for you. Play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox or mobile devices now by using my links in the pinned comment or in the video description. New and returning players on PC and consoles that haven't played in the last 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across all platforms that includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions and 7 days of premium account. It is available for a limited time only, so act now. Please support the people who support me. The US Navy has had several problematic acquisition programs during the years, to say the least. Just off the top of my head and shamelessly revealing my age, the Seawolf submarine class being abandoned after 3 hulls just because it was too expensive. The Zumwalt DDG that became so expensive that only 3 were built, and their main gun rounds had the same price as an anti-ship missile. The Littoral Combat Ship, whose technical design and project management are a masterclass of how not to do it. And frankly, it was a shaky concept since the beginning. And what about the delay of the new generation of attack submarines till 2040s, when plenty of Los Angeles subs will be retiring, causing a decline of the US submarine fleet? And what about the Gerald Ford carrier, which was expected to enter service in 2015, but became fully operational only in 2024? What about the 2 next ships in class that are already delayed of at least 2 years? And don't get me started about the Constellation frigate, which is years late and whose design is not complete yet, despite it is based on an existing hull. And now it is the FAXX turn, but this time, to be fair, it is probably not the Navy's fault.
At my direction, the United States Air Force is moving forward with the world's first 6th generation fighter jet. It'll be known as the F-47. The generals picked a title.
In March 2025, when Trump announced that Boeing will be building the F-47, we were all waiting a similar announcement from the US Navy about the FAXX. Boeing and Northrop Grumman were still in the competition, with Lockheed Martin having been disqualified at an earlier stage. Weeks passed and nothing happened. leaving many observers perplexed, including myself. Then, in a policy statement released on the 15th of July during congressional budget deliberations, the Trump administration expressed strong support for reassessing the FAXX timeline. It stated that the fiscal 2026 defense plan aims to go all in on the F-47, allocating only $74 million to the FAXX to complete design work and preserve it as a future option. I quote, "Awarding the FAXX contract as written is likely to delay the higher priority F-47 program with low likelihood of improving the timeline to fill the Navy sixth-generation fighter. The administration looks forward to working with the Congress to identify an optimal path forward." In June, the Navy Secretary John Fallon expressed similar concerns, but on the contrary, lawmakers were oriented toward funding the program and, in some cases, even accelerate it. The Navy, on the surface, pun intended, is not worried about this decision, and a few officials pointed out that no decision to delay has been taken yet, and everything is part of the budgeting process. Of course. Yeah, sure, of course. I mean, in theory, the program could be recovered, but the consensus among the observers is that a 2 to 3 years delay is now unavoidable. And anyway, if the problem is the capability of the American aerospace industry to manage two sixth-generation programs, even restoring the funds won't fix the problem. Obviously, Boeing CEO Kelly Orber said that Boeing alone could handle both the F-47 and the FAXX at the same time with zero problems. And after all, what would you expect him to say? However, with Lockheed Martin deep into the F-35, Northrop Grumman running the B-21 program and the new ICBM, and Boeing now starting with the F-47, there may be indeed a shortage of competent personnel, which takes 5 to 10 years to form, at least. I am in a position of assessing whether this is true or not, and probably the data that are needed to confirm or deny are buried in the HR departments of these large companies, but it seems reasonable. The other element that seems self-evident in this affair is that the Air Force has won. The F-47 is deemed a much higher priority than the FAXX. Some synergies were always expected between the two programs, but while it is easy to adapt a carrier aircraft for land use, it is much more difficult to do the opposite. So it is very, very unlikely that we will ever see an F-47 carrier variant. However, what are the immediate consequences of this decision, and most of all, what is the FAXX? So, the FAXX is, well, nothing yet. It is a program. It is the program to build a sixth-generation fighter for the US Navy to replace the FA-18EF fighter. But it's also supposed to replace the EA-18G Growler in the electronic attack role and to cover some secondary missions like airborne refueling, surveillance and target acquisition and reconnaissance. It started in 2012, it has been kept out of the spotlight, and in 2025 it got to the point of assigning the contract for the full engineering development. And then what we have just described happened. So now it is stuck. Anyway, what is a sixth-generation fighter and why the Navy needs one? All this generation thing is basically a creation of Lockheed Martin marketing, but it caught on and it has some utility to classify an aircraft in relation to its technology. The third generation is the aircraft we all grew up with, F-16, F-15, Tornado, Su-27 in Russia, and in China, no, China is different, we don't go there. The fifth generation, at least visually, brought a discontinuity. Stealth imposed specific shapes that are now known as clear visual signatures of the fifth generation. Other features of the 5th generation that you may find in various definitions around the internet are super cruise, super maneuverability, information fusion, low probability of intercept, cooperative targeting, and other electronic wizardries. This is a pretty comprehensive list, so what is left for the 6th generation? Well, this is still up for debate even because we have no reference. We don't know yet the capabilities of the J36 or the J50. The F47 is just PowerPoint, GCAP and FAXX are still up in the air and classified. So after having studied everything that I could find that is in the public domain, I think that the 6th generation can boil down to 3 defining features. The first is broadband stealth. Current stealth implementations are the most effective against radars that can be used to guide weapons. That is around the X band of the electromagnetic spectrum. It has been known since forever that lower frequency radars like the L band or the UHF can spot stealth aircraft at a much longer range than the X band radars, but it is much more difficult to guide a weapon using those systems. Broadband stealth is achievable, but at least with the current technology, it requires a particular design of the aircraft. Typically, flying wings like the B-2, the B-21 or the Chinese drones are broadband stealthy. The second defining feature is MUMT, which has nothing to do with mums. It means manned-unmanned teaming. We are talking about the aircraft integration with UCAVs, that is, with unmanned combat aerial vehicles. These are unmanned platforms that are supposed to augment the combat aircraft, either acting as sensors, as weapon carriers, as electronic warfare units, or even tankers. Programs like the American CCA or the European GCAPs and SCAF are expected to produce UCAVs. There are already examples of UCAVs flying, like the Russian Okhotnik or the American MQ-25, but this is not the level of integration of the 6th generation. 6th generation UCAVs are expected to have a large degree of autonomy, being capable of reacting to threats and eventually even engaging targets without the pilot's previous authorization. Moreover, the pilot should be able to control them with the same loose interaction that he has with a human wingman. This is a tall order, and the development is still ongoing, and I have my doubts that they will be ready soon. But the first units are being tested right now, so it is coming. The third feature is adaptive cycle engines, or they're also called variable cycle engines. This is the next generation of jet engines capable of a range of performance superior to the current generation. There are various different solutions, but the configuration relevant for us is the 3 streams turbofan. Current fighter engines are low bypass ratio turbofans. This means that of all the air that is sucked or pushed into the engine, a percentage does not go through the hot core, which is sometimes called the gas generator, but it just goes through a low pressure compressor, and then it is expelled from the back. This is sometimes called the cold flow. The bypass ratio is the ratio between the mass that flows in the compressor on the mass that flows in the core. For a military fighter engine, the order of magnitude is 0.2, 0.3. For a civilian airliner engine, it can be 10 or 15. A low bypass is good for thrust. A high bypass is good for fuel efficiency. The actual bypass ratio of a specific engine is the result of a compromise to achieve the desired performances for that specific engine. The thermodynamics to explain why you would want to do this is definitely too complex for a YouTube video like this, but the final outcome of an adaptive cycle engine is a better compromise in terms of thrust and fuel efficiency. An adaptive cycle engine has 3 flows. One cold, one hot, and one that can be hot or cold to adapt to what is needed in the moment. In cruise flight, during a transfer, 2 flows are cold, and this improves the fuel efficiency. In combat, where thrust is needed the most, the variable flow can be diverted through the engine core. The final outcome is an aircraft that has the same speed and thrust performance as the current generation, but it can have much better fuel efficiency and longer ranges for the same fuel consumption. So, now we know what the features of a 6th generation fighter are. Now, why do the Navy need one? Well, the Navy needs it more or less for the same reasons that the Air Force needs the F-47. The Navy doctrine is to acquire air superiority and then systematically destroy whatever it is that they reckon to destroy. To do so, they need an aircraft capable of penetrating air defenses thanks to stealth, use the aircraft and the UCAV's firepower to destroy them together with other high-priority targets, and do so while keeping the aircraft carrier far enough to be safe from any reaction. I know this sounds simplistic, but in few words, this is what the Americans are thinking. So, let's get into some details. What is the combat radius of the current carrier wing? Well, the first thing to understand is that the range of an aircraft is not a fixed figure, like on a car. On a car, the range is 700 to 800 kilometers, and it doesn't change much with the load or the speed. Or better, it does, but the variation is small enough that it can be ignored for any practical purpose. For an aircraft, the range changes substantially with the payload, the speed profile and the altitude profile of the mission. Often the specifications in the public domain report the maximum range in a clean configuration, and the picture is further complicated by the possibility of carrying drop tanks and the availability of in-flight refueling. However, there is a rule of thumb that we can use. In air-to-ground configuration, the range is about a third of the maximum range, while in air-to-air configuration, the range is slightly above one half. This is an extremely rough approximation, and our purpose is to assess how close the carrier group needs to be to a target to execute the mission, more or less. For the Super Hornet, the published maximum range is 1,275 nautical miles. In the case of the Super Hornet, we also have some numbers taken from official test documentation that show a combat range in air-to-ground configuration of slightly less than 500 nautical miles. Considering that this was derived from a test, we can assume that in real conditions, the range without in-flight refueling is around 400 nautical miles, that is about 750 kilometers. However, we have to consider the availability of several standoff weapons like the JASM that may considerably extend the range, even of hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, albeit they are available in relatively limited numbers than other type of ammunitions, like, for example, the JDAM. The F-35C does not have an official published range. Lockheed Martin reports 1,200 nautical miles in its public brochures, with a combat radius of 670 miles. Considering that a stealth aircraft is less likely to carry external payloads, the penalty may not be as severe as for a conventional jet. In fact, there are unofficial reports that the actual range of the F-35 is quite a bit longer than published, so I believe that sticking with 670 miles is a good compromise. The same range extension as per the Super Hornet applies, and in this case, it is probably even more important. In fact, with the introduction of the F-35C, the F-18 is progressively focusing on the air defense role, while the F-35 in the ground and surface attack. So, given these ranges, where a carrier group should be operating in the Western Pacific in case of a conflict with China? To reach the Strait of Taiwan with the F-18 in case of a Chinese invasion, the carrier should operate about 300 miles off the eastern coast of Taiwan. From this position, the F-18s can reach the Taiwan Strait, and the F-35s could attack targets on continental China in Fujian and Guangdong. But do not forget that these areas will be well within the Chinese air defense bubbles and quite close to the operating bases of the Chinese Air Force. So in these areas, unmanned vehicles should carry the bulk of the burden. These are areas where it is conceivable that a human pilot will face too many risks with current technology. Anyway, this operation scheme places the carrier group well within the range of the Chinese DF-21 anti-ship ballistic missiles launched from Chinese mainland. The DF-21 obviously requires a way to close the kill chain, and the Chinese use the Yaogan series of satellites with various sensors. However, if the satellites are jammed or shot down, this position is still well within the range of the Chinese HALE drones, and do not forget that some of them are actually stealth aircraft. Any Chinese attack with bombers or surface ship requires to close the carrier group well within the F-18 range, given the range of the Chinese anti-ship missiles, so the carrier group can in principle defend from this kind of threat. However, particularly at the beginning of the war, before the start of the hostilities, it is possible that surface formations of bombers do manage to sail or fly close enough to conduct a surprise attack. And not related directly to the air domain, this area east of Taiwan is usually patrolled by Chinese subs, which could be a serious concern for the battle group. In general, the current reach of the carrier air wing is not enough to keep the carrier in completely safe waters. The carrier will likely go back and forth according to the pulse concept, but the danger is real. However, for operations in the South China Sea, the situation is better. The carrier group could operate east of the Philippines and the archipelago would protect it, since it is probably the best US ally in the region and it is bursting at the seams with US military installations. From this position, the carrier wing could cover the eastern part of the South China Sea, being relatively safe from every threat except the ballistic anti-ship missiles. In this area, with the help of the Air Force, more tanker support may be available, extending the range even further. The same is unlikely to happen in any meaningful way east of Taiwan, since it is a much more exposed location where tankers may not be safe. But operating from this area, mainland China is well outside the carrier wing reach. The safest option is probably operating from the southern part of the South China Sea in the waters between Borneo, Malaysia and Sumatra. There are actually pirates in these areas, but I don't think that they are really a problem for the carrier group. This area is most likely beyond the reach of ballistic anti-ship missiles and other Chinese threats. Well, with the potential exception of the first stage of the hostilities, where the same case we discussed before may apply, where surprise attacks are always possible. Moreover, the surrounding countries, even if they may not be exactly friendly, would likely remain neutral. So this sounds a feasible option, but from this area the carrier wing cannot reach the northern part of the South China Sea or continental China. So, as we can see, getting any closer than what we have described exposes the carrier group to growing risks, but if it wants to stay in relatively safe waters, the reach of the carrier wing is barely enough to offer a contribution to the hostilities, save in the immediate Taiwan vicinities, where the risk is also higher. So, this is the reason for the new generation engines, and the FAXX should feature a combat radius clearly longer than the current air wing and with internal fuel to preserve the broadband stealth configuration. And in fact, it was leaked that the range specifications for the FAXX would be 25% more than the F-35. Okay, it is better than nothing, but it would not significantly change the current situation, while an increase in the range of the Chinese systems has to be expected in the future. And with this bombshell, we end the video. Thank you very much for watching this far. It has been an honor and a pleasure having had your attention. A big thank you goes to our sponsor. Thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to play it for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox or mobile now by using my links in the pinned comment or video description. New returning players that haven't played in 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across PC and consoles, including multiple premium vehicles and other goodies. Available across PC and consoles for a limited time only, so make sure not to miss it. And an even bigger thank you goes to all those who are supporting the channel on Patreon by being a member or by any of the other means available. All the links are in the description. You are absolute stars. Without you, this would not be possible. And if you can support the channel financially, and please do it only if you can afford it, please subscribe if you haven't yet, hit the bell, hit like, leave a comment, let me know what do you think about all this FAXX thing, so we can have the usual interesting discussion. This is it. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.